We'll start the show in just a second, but first I want to tell you about today's sponsors. SteadyMD lets you maintain a meaningful, long-lasting relationship with a primary care physician who you can meet with anytime over phone or video chat. You don't need insurance. It's only $99 a month with no other fees or copays. Visit steadymd.com/Pakman to get started. I want to talk today about something that will become a bigger and bigger issue over the next couple of years when it comes to the things that Joe Biden and Democrats want to do, and the fact that there will be resistance from the Republican Party that's not like the typical resistance we've seen in the past from more traditional Republicans, but a more sort of pernicious and extreme resistance which completely poisons the well for people that want to have good faith debates about what policy should be. And I think the best way to sort of explain what I'm talking about is to imagine it through the lens of one issue. Let's pick the issue of taxes to discuss this, just for the sake of selecting something. There is no one right answer on what tax rates should be and what tax brackets should be and what should be tax deductions versus tax credits versus nothing at all. These are real topics over which there is serious debate. There's a lot of academic literature, for example, which suggests the top marginal tax rate for generating the most government revenue should be 70%. But beyond that, it can start to be a disincentive for people to work. But even if you agree on 70%, at what level of income should that rate kick in? Should it be $2 million a year or $10 or $20 million a year? There are really good debates there. There's not one answer to that question. There are real debates as to whether low or no income tax states are really cheaper to live in, or in a state with no income tax, are you saving on income tax, but there's higher sales tax on average and higher property tax on average? So like, is a no income tax state really cheaper overall, or is it just an illusion meant to attract people with a political statement, we have no state income tax, when you pay more in other types of taxes? Okay, that's a great thing to explore. We can debate whether people should pay any taxes at all if they earn under $10,000 a year, or $20,000 a year, or $30,000 a year, or should they get a tax credit versus a low tax rate, or where should phase outs begin for certain programs, welfare programs, or tax credits, or whatever. What about universal basic income? There are good debates being had there. And all of these are debates that can be had in good faith with people who disagree about the answer. Like, I have an opinion about all of those issues, and I recognize there are people with other opinions who are discussing these issues in good faith. They're operating within the realm of what's reasonable. They have valid points to make, and these are the people we need to engage with. The problem here is when extremists poison the well by introducing ideas that, aside from making no sense, are never going to be a reality. So like when you interject the people who say all taxes are theft, or all taxes are slavery as a starting point, or all taxes should be abolished as a starting point. This is the United States. This is a country of 331 million people. We're not getting rid of all taxes. The idea of taxes as slavery is not going to push the debate forward as to what tax policy should be. Or people who say, we should put a 99% tax on incomes over $1 million. No one should be allowed to make over $1 million. It's not going to happen, guys. We're getting nowhere with that as the starting point. And I'm going to distinguish in a moment extremist poisoning the well versus productive stretching of the Overton window. These are two different things. So the people who say, these things, they are often asserting that we should include these ideas because we don't want to suppress speech and we don't want to censor ideas. I agree with that. But as I've said before, not every harebrained idea deserves a seat at the adult table when we're discussing policy. So we often talk about moving the Overton window. For example, the more we talk about Medicare for all as the gold standard, the more a public option seems to be a centrist idea, which it is. The more we talk about $2,000 per month in coronavirus stimulus, the more that a single $2,000 payment seems like a pretty centrist idea, which it is. And so we want to use the Overton window to better our negotiating ability, but taxes are slavery doesn't improve anyone's negotiating ability. It's just a crazy idea. And this is how these new extremists in the House of Representatives are going to be poisoning the well, not necessarily on taxes, but this is the idea of it, and making it impossible for Democrats to do anything, which they've admitted they plan to do. So as a result, as we spoke about yesterday, I'm completely on board with what we learned Bernie Sanders plans to do, and that's use budget reconciliation to get as much done as possible in the Senate with a simple majority rather than requiring 60 votes, meaning they don't need a single Republican, assuming that all 50 Democrats are on the same page. There unfortunately is no other way with people who are fundamentally bad faith actors. Now, I'm willing to have my mind changed, but what good will the idea of bipartisanship do when it just means allowing completely ridiculous ideas to be part of the conversation and completely absurd people to slow down the possibility of progress? So there's the debate about the filibuster that continues. There's the idea of unity and bipartisanship that Joe Biden has expressed as a goal. As I've said before, I don't think it's going to happen. And this is exactly why. These extremist ideas poison the well, and we're seeing it happen already on Fox News. We're seeing it on OAN. We're seeing it on Newsmax. And I believe that while I am willing to have my mind changed, the idea of bipartisanship, merely if that means allowing ridiculous, radical, reactionary ideas into the debate, does nothing good for anybody. And Democrats should simply plow through it for these next at least 2 years, during which they will have control of the House, Senate, and the White House. If you disagree with me, let me know. I received a ton of emails about this. One of the most common requests for segments I've gotten over the last couple of weeks is from people who write in and say some version of, I have a Trumpist conspiracy theorist family member or friend or coworker. I don't know how to talk to them. I don't want to make anybody angry, but in some way, I feel the need to try to knock some sense into them, proverbially, not physically. And I don't even know where to start. And in the past, depending on the relationship with the person, I say, well, you have to decide. Your approach will depend on how aggressive you're willing to get. Are you willing to ruin this relationship? If these are presumably people you have to continue to be around cordially because they're coworkers or family members or friends that you love and want to continue being around, I believe the best approach is a sort of gentle, probing, Socratic method of questioning, asking people to think about how they came to the conclusions they came to, and hopefully some fraction of them will say, oh, the basis on which I've come to hold these beliefs isn't that strong. Let me sort of re-examine it. That's the best I've suggested we can really hope for if you want to go with the gentle probing idea. Charlie Wartzel wrote a really great opinion piece in the New York Times called How to Talk to Friends and Family Who Share Conspiracy Theories, which contains a lot of really important information. And I thought we would go over some of the basics. And I recognize that when I've talked about a Socratic method of questioning, one of the questions that comes up regularly is, what exactly are the types of questions that I should be asking? So let's start there. First of all, almost exclusively, the best place to start when someone shares a conspiracy theory on Facebook or in person at Thanksgiving or whatever the case may be is, where is the information coming from? Where did you learn that? How did you come to believe that thing that you just told me? This is useful because it opens the door to later asking, and how do you know that you can trust that source? How do you know the information is trustworthy? So it's useful for that reason. It's also useful because it helps you understand the sort of information environment. Where are some people getting this stuff? Some might be getting it from Facebook. Others may be hearing it at work. So that's very important. The next step, as I sort of alluded to, would be asking people how they've determined that the information is trustworthy. How have they determined that their source of information can be believed? What about it makes it believable? How would they know if it were not believable? These are generally relatively inoffensive questions that you can ask with a genuine curiosity to establish their system of belief. And they can get people to start, they can get the gears moving. How do you identify something that would be less believable? And a lot of this is not necessarily for you to understand their level of media literacy, although that is useful. But again, inject the idea that they need a process for thinking about, have I properly vetted and evaluated the conspiracy or the fake news that I'm sharing right now? And then maybe the hardest part is to really follow through on the assumption that if their conspiracy theory was real, then what other things would have to be real? And this one requires a little more knowledge and nuance. Imagine that you're right about this conspiracy theory. Imagine that what you're saying is true. What would happen next? What are you anticipating it would mean in terms of this or of that? And there's a really good example. I'll try to, this is on my Twitter. I'll try to reshare it if I can find it. I retweeted a really good Twitter thread that I went over last week on a stream where there was like a Hollywood screenwriter talking to a conspiracy theorist woman back and forth on Twitter. And he actually did this. He engaged with her ideas, which started with, there's a plan for Trump to remain president. She was posting this on January 21st. Obviously, Trump was gone, but she was saying there is a plan for Trump to remain president after the inauguration. And this guy started asking specific questions. Okay, how will it be carried out? Through what mechanism will Trump be back in office and Biden be gone? Well, he's going to be arrested. Okay, what will he be arrested for? And eventually the woman came to the claim that Joe Biden had actually already died and been replaced with an imposter at some point in the past. And it was fascinating to see the questions that followed, which included, how did Biden die? Was it of natural causes, disease, or did somebody kill him? If he was killed, who killed him? How was it covered up? How many people would have needed to be involved in that to replace Biden with an imposter with nobody knowing? Why did they even need to kill him? Like, in other words, if Biden was going to steal the election either way, why do you need a fake Biden to steal the election from Donald Trump? Why not just have the real Biden steal the election from Donald Trump? And although this particular woman was clearly too far beyond reach, what was interesting was that it was a really good example of the types of questions that for some people can actually get them to say, maybe there's something about this that doesn't make sense. Really important. Last thought on this. Just because a belief isn't based on a solid foundation doesn't mean people will give it up easily. And remember that just because this idea, this system doesn't work on one person doesn't mean that it's the wrong method. We looked at that focus group with 12 Trumpists last week. Only one of the 12 was willing to re-examine his beliefs and see reason. So a lot of people aren't even open to this. But for those that are, I find that this method seems to be the best one. Let me know your thoughts. If you've had success with this method, let me know. If you failed with this method, also let me know. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
If you are anything like me, you probably aren't thrilled with the idea of going into a doctor's office right now. And thankfully, there's a practical and affordable way to take control of your health and get personalized care from the comfort of your home. It's a service called SteadyMD. They're one of our sponsors. You take a quiz, you get matched with a licensed primary care physician who understands your health needs. You have a 1-hour video call with your new doctor. You establish a meaningful relationship with them. And after that, your doctor is available to you anytime by text, phone, or video chat. This is not a random doctor on call. Each doctor at SteadyMD has a limited number of patients, so they actually have time to listen to you. You get the personal attention that you deserve. They can do almost everything an in-person doctor can do. Perform medical evaluations, talk to you about health concerns, send prescriptions to your home or local pharmacy, and anything they can't do online, they'll quickly set you up with an in-person provider to do, things like blood tests as an example. You don't need insurance. It's only $99 a month with no other fees or copays. I took their quiz. They matched me with a doctor who specializes in my particular health needs and situation. The doctor they gave me is a really perfect fit for me and my medical needs. They have a special offer only for my audience. You'll get 50% off your first month, but only until January 31st. So make sure to sign up soon. Click the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The only place to get genuine David Pakman Show memberships is joinpakman.com, except no substitutes. If someone calls you and says they're offering memberships, we don't sell memberships by phone. If you get a letter saying send us a check for a membership, we don't solicit memberships by mail. The one place to get a membership is joinpakman.com, and I hope that you will. Over the last 5, or I guess now we're on day, really, oh wow, today's actually the beginning of day 7 of the Biden presidency. We have seen a dramatic change in what press briefings look like. Kayleigh McEnany, who was Trump's press secretary, was replaced with Jen Psaki, who is Joe Biden's press secretary. And for the most part, she answers the questions that are asked. She's still a press secretary. When it's not advantageous to answer, she won't. But we're actually getting valuable information about what's going on with Joe Biden. Now, one of the additional characters that has sort of come to prominence during the Jen Psaki era is the son of Fox and Friends anchor Steve Doocy, named Peter Doocy. Peter Doocy is Steve Doocy's son. And he, I guess, is now part of the White House press corps. And he has made it a habit to ask the most aggressive question he can. And good for him, except that it's not good journalism. They're just sort of really dumb gotcha type questions. And hilariously, Jen Psaki actually called Peter Doocy Steve Doocy a couple of times. So this is like a whole little subculture thing that's developing in the White House press briefings. And I want to look at some clips with you. It really does seem as though Peter Doocy is trying to make himself known as the tough guy who's willing to hold Jen Psaki accountable, except it just implodes hilariously every time. Here is one clip from when Dr. Fauci joined Jen Psaki last week at her first or second press briefing. And Peter Doocy asked Dr. Fauci about rumors that Amazon was now offering to get involved with COVID-19. And right-wingers say it's bias. Amazon refused to help Trump. Now they want to help Joe Biden in order to make him look good. Here is Dr. Fauci asked about that by Peter Doocy.
Yeah.
How helpful would it have been if Amazon got involved with the federal response to COVID-19 before Biden took office? And do you know about any plans or discussions ahead of yesterday?
No, I don't think I could answer that question. I'd be waving my hands about that. Sorry. Well, you know, one of the new things in this administration is if you don't know the answer, don't guess. Just say you don't know the answer. Yeah. Yes.
Now, of course, this has nothing to do with Dr. Fauci. Peter Doocy is, I get it. Peter Doocy is implying Amazon has political motivations for not helping Trump and offering to help Biden. That's if it's true that Amazon didn't offer to help Trump. I don't know. We don't know the answer to that. But the questions about Amazon's involvement during a prior administration either need to go to someone from that administration who was working on supply and logistics, which Dr. Fauci was not, or to Amazon. The idea that that's a question for Dr. Fauci is hilarious. And Peter Doocy tried the same thing with Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary.
And on COVID, the question, did the transition officials know before yesterday that Amazon wanted to get involved in such a meaningful way?
We saw, not that I'm aware of. I'm happy to check. I mean, when the reporting came out, I asked the question, and I think internally, and you know what was conveyed to me, and I don't think we discussed this yesterday, was that we've had a lot of outreach, some privately, some publicly, from a range of businesses and private sector entities, and we certainly welcome that, and we'll be considering all of those offers and what makes the most sense in our plans and proposals.
So, because there are some Trump officials saying they were never offered help from Amazon, and so they're essentially saying they think this was a political call for Amazon to wait while lives were hanging in the balance, but you're saying that is not the case.
I'm not aware of the timeline of when Amazon reached out. That sounds like a question for Amazon to me.
And that's exactly right. Did they reach out to the Trump administration? I don't know. Ask the Trump administration or ask Amazon. It's not really a question for Joe Biden. Why are they interested now? Well, that's a question for Amazon. It's not a question for Dr. Fauci or for Jen Psaki. Then he goes to, isn't it divisive that there will be impeachment?
I'm sorry, I told you I was going to ask you. I just skipped over you. Go ahead.
Right. I'll take it now. So if President Biden wants a theme of his presidency to be unifying the country, does he think that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer should drop a potentially divisive Senate impeachment trial?
The answer should be the same every single time. Joe Biden will play no role whatsoever in the impeachment trial. He is not going to try to get anyone in the Senate to do anything. He is not going to try to influence anyone in the Senate not to do anything. Joe Biden was not in the Senate when the House voted on impeachment. Joe Biden is not in the Senate now. It would be inappropriate for Joe Biden to exert any influence one way or the other. He will remain totally out of it. That is the exact right answer, and that's the answer that should be given every single time. Peter Doocy then also asked, why didn't Joe Biden wear a mask on, quote, federal lands during the inauguration at the Lincoln Memorial?
Go ahead.
Why weren't President Biden and all members of the Biden family masked at all times on federal lands last night if he signed an executive order that mandates masks on federal lands at all times?
At the inaugural
At the Lincoln Memorial, yes.
And of course, they basically were wearing masks most of the time. Masks did come off at one point for some photographs. It was just Biden's family together. Probably a bad look, but the idea that this is a gotcha question when the Trump administration's mishandling of the virus led to probably more than 100,000 unnecessary deaths, it's just ridiculous. Here is Peter Doocy trying to call out Joe Biden for putting in place travel restrictions now after previously calling Donald Trump's travel restrictions xenophobic.
And just one more about the announcement you made off the top about the travel restrictions. Mm-hmm. When President Trump was imposing travel restrictions in March, specifically on China, then candidate Biden called it xenophobic and fear-mongering. So now President Biden is putting travel restrictions on people coming in from other countries. What word do we use to describe that?
Now, this is just not true. This has been repeated ad nauseum. Biden said it was xenophobic. He said the travel restrictions were xenophobic. The truth is that Biden supported COVID travel restrictions and he called Trump xenophobic, but not for the COVID travel restrictions. This is one of those where if you repeat it enough times, it sort of becomes true. But Joe Biden didn't say the COVID restrictions were xenophobic. He supported them. And he also said that Donald Trump was xenophobic for other reasons. Yesterday, Joe Biden, interestingly, deliberately picking Peter Doocy, knowing that Doocy asks him sandbagging questions. Check this out. Doocy sort of asks a weird question about shutting down the virus, and Joe Biden handles it perfectly well.
Now, wait. I know he always asks me tough questions. And he always has an edge to them, but I like him anyway. So go ahead and ask the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. So you just said that you think within 3 weeks or so we'll be at the point where there are 1 million vaccines per day, but it seems like...
No, I think we'll get there before that. I said I misspoke. I hope we'll be able to increase as we go along till we get to the 1.5 million a day. That's my hope.
And then the follow-up to that would be, now that you're president and you're saying there's nothing we can do to change the trajectory of the pandemic in the next several months, what happened to 2 months ago when you were talking declaratively about I'm going to shut down the virus?
Well, I'm going to shut down the virus, but I never said I'd do it in 2 months. I said it took a long time to get here. It's going to take a long time to beat it. And so we have millions of people out there who have the virus. We're just, for the first day, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I've been doing other things this morning, speaking with foreign leaders, but one of the things I think this is one of the first days that the number has actually come down, the number of deaths and the number on a daily basis and the number of hospitalizations, et cetera. It's going to take time. It's going to take a heck of a lot of time. And we still have, as Dr. Fauci constantly points out, it's one thing when we have mass, how can I say it politely, mass disregard of the warnings about not wearing masks and wearing masks and social distancing and failure to social distance and people getting together on holidays in ways that weren't recommended, et cetera. We see, first thing that happens is we see the number of infections go up. Then you see the hospitalizations go up. Then you see the deaths go up.
So remember that as reported yesterday, 69% of the country approves of Joe Biden's week 1 handling of the pandemic. But regardless, Joe Biden not fazed, not thrown off by Peter Doocy there. And I think this is how Ducey is going to try to become more well-known during this presidency. I think that the OAN reporter, I think it's OAN, Chanel Rion, also tried to become known for asking certain types of questions during the Trump administration. The problem was she was very, very bad. Oh, where is that noise coming from? I apologize for that. She was very, very bad at asking the questions. And so she never really became super well known. Ducey seems better, at least at formulating the questions, and he may very well end up becoming relatively known for dropping tough questions on Jen Psaki and Joe Biden. But so far, the questions are all quite dumb. This is very interesting. We have the first approval rating for President Joe Biden. It's 63%. This is the highest approval rating at any time for any president dating back 12 years to 2009. To find an approval rating for a president higher than Joe Biden's current approval rating of 63%, you have to go all the way back to 2009, Barack Obama's first year in the White House, when Obama hit 69% approval. Note that Donald Trump never got to even 50% approval, even one time during his entire presidency. Now, there's a couple different things going on here. There is such a dramatic shift in COVID policy, which is one of the top issues for most Americans right now. From Trump, who couldn't have failed more miserably, to Biden, who's at least trying. And we'll see what degree of success he has. I think COVID explains a lot of the shift to a high approval rating for Joe Biden. In addition, presidents often have their best approval ratings at the very beginning, before they've done things that their political opponents can say are bad, or done things that are actually bad. George W. Bush was different in that way. George W. Bush's approval rating skyrocketing, I think to 88% after 9/11, which was not which was a bit of a ways in, months in to George W. Bush's presidency. But typically, this is when January, February, March of their first term. This is when presidents have their highest approval. So it's not totally shocking that Biden's doing okay now. The fact that he's at 63% is quite interesting. We've not seen an approval that high for a president in 12 years. Now, being realistic, Biden probably settles below 63%. If he can really turn the pandemic around in the next 4 to 6 months, maybe he could get to 68. Maybe he could get to 70. Remember that right now, about 30% of this country is completely wackadoo. OK, and it's very hard for me to imagine that Biden's ceiling is much higher than 70 or 72% anyway. So maybe a successful Biden can peak at 67, 68, maybe 70. And a successful Biden would probably settle somewhere around the mid 50s if he does well. If he does as poorly as Trump, then you'd expect to see him in the high 30s, low 40s, the way that Donald Trump does. The real test for Biden will be these next 3 to 6 months. What happens with the virus? What happens with vaccination? We are up now up to 1.25 million vaccinations a day, which is great. And what happens when unemployment expires for a lot of people? There are some major tests coming for Joe Biden, but these early numbers, very, very interesting to see. And at least to the degree that a hyperpolarized country can be united behind what a president is doing, 63% approval and 69% approval of COVID so far in this first week. It is significant. To pretend it's not would be dismissive of something that is significant. This is when you expect to see presidents with some of their higher approvals. Let's check in again about this in 4 to 6 weeks. Let's take a quick break. Make sure you're following the show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. And while you're there, follow me on Instagram at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%, BETTER21.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today David Shore, who's a data scientist who consults with Democratic groups and has a number of insights into many different areas of the political world, is the way I say it. Glad to have you here today.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's just start with 2020 polling. I mean, how off or on was it? Certainly Joe Biden was winning the popular vote polling, and he won the popular vote, and he became the president. There were certainly some states in which the numbers leading up to the election did not quite work out. I mean, what's your sort of overall assessment of what's happening with polling right now?
Yeah, well, first, as a guess disclaimer, I think in some ways it's funny that going into election night, we thought that Joe Biden would win and that Democrats would get 50 or 51 Senate seats. And, the end result, Joe Biden is president, Democrats do have 50 Senate seats. So I think that is kind of funny. But, that said, the polling was actually fairly bad this year. Just to put numbers on it, I think there's kind of two distinct problems, with polling. One is just that the numbers were way too high for Democrats. On average, there was about a 3% bias toward Democrats, and that's in vote share, which means that in terms of margin, you're looking at roughly 6%. This happened on basically every level of government, on the Senate, on the House, on the presidency. And if you were looking at polls, you were coming in expecting that Biden was going to win states like Florida, that we would have maybe like a bunch of Democratic seats, and that we were supposed to pick up 10 seats in the House. And, none of those things happened. And then I think on top of that, it's not just that the polling on average, was too Democratic, but the kind of error pattern by state, really matched what we saw in 2016 and, what we saw in 2018, where these states in the Midwest with a lot of, non-college educated whites really we saw a strong overestimation of support. I think there was a Quinnipiac poll in Wisconsin right before the election where it said that Biden would win by 15, and he ended up, winning by less than 1. So yeah, I think it was a pretty bad cycle for polling. And then just the last angle, just to recount, all the ways the polls were bad this year, is just in terms of looking at coalitions. The big changes in this election, roughly speaking, were that non-college whites were, basically where they were in 2016. College-educated whites swung something like 6 or 7% toward us. African Americans swung 2 points down, and I think Hispanic voters, now that all the data's in, looks like they dropped by like 9%. And the polls didn't really see any of those trends coming. There was like a little bit of warning signs, with non-white voters, though it ended up being worse than the polls thought. But if you looked at the polls really told this story that we were going to see education depolarization, that non-college whites were going to trend toward Democrats and college-educated whites were going to, stay basically where they were last time. And that just didn't happen. If you look at if you just look at the college, non-college gap, it looks like the polls were off by something like 10 or 11%, which is actually crazy. In a lot of ways, the polls were a lot worse than 2016.
So let's dig into one aspect of this, which is that the concept of polling is you can't poll everybody. So the idea is you get a representative sample. And what does it mean that it's representative? Often we're talking about, well, we'll normalize it for education, or we can normalize it for race. We can normalize it for political affiliation. You can normalize it for age, all of these different things. But one of the things you really can't normalize for, correct me if I'm wrong, is the types of people that are more likely to participate in a poll versus the types of people that are more likely to opt out. And we heard this from some on the right who kind of said it as a lot of Trumpists don't trust the polls, so they either give deliberately fake answers or don't participate. And there's no great way to deal with that as a pollster. How much truth is there to the general idea of people willing to and not willing to participate, and then maybe more specifically to some of the explanations that were given by supporters of former President Trump?
Yeah, I think in some ways, I think there's something to the story. I do want to be clear that if you ask someone who they're going to vote for in a survey, they do generally tell you the truth.
Okay.
It's not an issue with trolling. But, that said, I think one of the big drivers for why the polling was so wrong this year and why it was actually worse than 2016 was that there were really giant, differences in who was answering the phone. Something that, the way that the firm I worked for, the way that they do polling, they actually match people back to voter files, and so we can see their party registration. And something that was really clear is that starting around March, Democrats became much more likely, to answer the phone than Republicans. And I think and they kind of stayed at these elevated levels throughout the entire election. And I think there's a pretty clear story that this had a lot to do with lockdown, that Democrats were literally home. There's like a lot of cell phone mobility data that really shows that Democrats stayed home and they didn't really have much to do, and they started answering surveys at high rates, and Republicans weren't doing that. And, they just weren't picking up the phones. But, generalizing, that was an issue with this year, and I think it was clear. But even in 2016, when we look back at why the polls were wrong, and I think this bias continued now, like, why is it that pollsters have such a hard time measuring opinion in states that have a lot of working class white people? And originally, people really talked about this in terms of Trump turning out a lot of new voters. And I think that there's a lot of evidence now that that's not really true, that, all of these election switches were really driven by people changing their minds as opposed to changes in who voted. But then the question is, why were the polls wrong? And why were the polls wrong in working class areas? And it kind of comes back to this concept of social trust that political scientists and sociologists like to talk about. And so that's just operationalized with this question of, do you think that people can be trusted, or do you think that people should keep to themselves? And something that's pretty wild, just socially, is that, the government's been asking this on a very high quality survey. They spend a couple $1,000s per person and they get like a 70% response rate. Phone response rates are closer to 1%, just for reference point. And they've been asking it since the 670s. And it used to be that, roughly 55% of people said that people could be trusted. And that figure is down to 30%. So that's sociologically very concerning, though above my pay grade. But it has measurement implications because people who say that people can be trusted, kind of unsurprisingly, are a lot more likely to answer phone surveys. And that used to not matter very much, because how much you trusted the people around you and how much you trust institutions just used to not be that correlated with partisanship. But in 2016, Donald Trump really reshaped the coalition. If 2012 was basically a fight over whether or not we should have universal health care, 2016 was much more of a referendum on like, how much do you trust the people around you? And we were only talking in these surveys to these high trust people who say that people can be trusted. And there was literally this hidden majority of low trust folks who went in the other direction. And so, we've actually looked and crosstabbed. And if you look among people who said that people could be trusted, that group swung toward Democrats by, something like 4 or 5%. But the other group went completely in the opposite direction. And, this high trust sample, that was the people we were polling, and that's the world we expected to see on election day. But then they didn't actually answer. And, the same thing, people don't realize happened in 2018. Democrats won, so they didn't notice. But if you look at the actual margins in places like West Virginia, places like Michigan, places like Ohio, the elections were much closer than the polls originally thought, even if we ended up winning. And then we see the same thing again, in 2020. And I think that social trust is a very important, angle for understanding it.
One of the things I saw you, to shift gears a little bit, I read some of your tweets about, which I find very interesting, is about the bias of the Electoral College. And you posted a couple things that I find really interesting. One is that you posted the partisan bias of the Electoral College over time. And one of the things you found is that Democrats now need about 52% of the vote in order to have a 50-50 shot of winning the presidency, given that it's not the national popular vote that decides, but rather the electoral vote. And then the other really interesting thing is that there's this notion that part of what makes the Electoral College depart in terms of its orientation from the popular vote is that small states are really overweighted relative to their populations. And you pointed out something very interesting, which is that in terms of the difference makers, when it comes down to who ultimately wins the Electoral College, it's more about the fact that there are some larger population states which are relatively close, could be 52-48, could be 55-45, 60-40, but because they are winner take all, you are essentially I don't know if the right word is disenfranchising, but if you're part of the 42% of Democrats in a big red state, your vote essentially doesn't matter for calculating the Electoral College. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just important to, say that the bias in the Electoral College, I think, is very new. It is true that, Gore won the popular vote and lost the Electoral College, but the bias of the Electoral College was really quite small that year. Gore got something like 50.2%, and he very, very narrowly lost. And so that was like random and not really that big a deal. And really, the Electoral College at various points has favored Democrats. It's if Barack Obama in 2012 had gotten about 49.5% of the vote, he actually still, probably would have won. That's why people talk about the blue wall. There are basically these big. This is just a little bit of a history lesson, but there are just these big Midwestern states that kind of had their economies centered around farming and manufacturing, and as a result, they're both, relatively white and also have relatively low education levels relative to the rest of the country. And the Electoral College really comes down to who does well in these places. And in 2012, Obama, a lot of his appeal was he actually did very well, with Midwestern whites. He did better in the Midwest than Kerry and really than a lot of Democrats before him. But he also did well enough among college-educated whites to make places like Virginia and Colorado competitive. So the Electoral College had like a small bias in his favor. 2016 totally changed that, though. And, it's really great if you can see the graph because, it just kind of wiggles around zero. And then there's just this sudden plunge to there being, I think, a three-point gap bias in the Republican favor. And I think that's, the really underappreciated part of understanding 2016, which is that Barack Obama got about 52% of the two-party vote in 2012, and Hillary Clinton got 51.1% of the vote. And in any other democracy, that would have been fine. A 0.9% decline, still, comfortably above 50. But the problem was that the Electoral College shifted from being about half a point bias in favor of Democrats to being 3 points bias in favor of Republicans. And then that bias increased again. And so it's helpful to put numbers on these things. And, just to get to your other question, I think people really don't understand why the Electoral College causes this bias. As you said, it's not that you have these tiny states. It's not about Wyoming. In order to get to 270 states, you have to win states like Wisconsin, like Minnesota, like Ohio. And there just happen to be a bunch of relatively evenly divided states that right now are somewhat more Republican than the country overall. And I think the key point is that the reason why this happened is because Democrats have started doing so much worse among working class white people. And, unless that gets reversed, I think it's unlikely that this is gonna revert. I think a lot of people expected that, things would get better this year. And the key point is that the bias went from 3 points in 2016 to 4 points in 2020. And so it really just shows how unworkable, our coalition is under this set of rules.
Absolutely fundamental insights to understand, really, in thinking about future elections. I mean, if one does not understand reality as it is, it's hard to run a campaign that is based on that reality. We've been speaking with David Shore, who's a data scientist who consults with Democratic groups. You certainly should follow him on Twitter, as I do. David, I so appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, let's take a whirlwind tour through religious media over the last 6 days with you. It's very interesting what's happening in religious right media right now. Absent evidence that is convincing in a court, which was all thrown out over the last 2 months, religious media has been taking a prophecy approach to Donald Trump, being the real winner of the November 2020 presidential election. They've been taking the approach that God or the Bible or prophecy or sacred text can explain what is happening with Joe Biden, and it can be the source of hope that Donald Trump is going to somehow reappear in the Oval Office sometime very soon. And this is really amazing. Now, as you know, I believe this is delusion. I believe that this is a form of mental illness if it's not merely a grift to make money. Okay, it may just be a scam, but I believe if the things you're going to hear now are real beliefs, I believe that it's mental illness. And I want to be sort of really clear when people say, it's rude to call this mental illness. I'm going to explain more about this. I don't think there's anything rude whatsoever about what I'm saying. Let's take a look at the first clip. This is right-wing pastor Hank Kunneman, who prophesied. I don't know. He predicted that Trump's reelection would happen. He's now fighting back against people who are saying, you were wrong, Hank. You said that Trump was going to be reelected. Maybe you are a false prophet. And Kunneman says, well, God hates it when you say that.
He didn't say he hates discord. He hates he. He hates you that are being a troll. He hates you that are attacking your Christian brothers and sisters. Yeah, but they're false. They're wrong. Excuse me. How do you know? Because it hasn't come to pass. How do you know that it hasn't come to pass? First of all, the president was reelected. Let's get that clear. Second of all, he was given a second term based on reelection. Well, he's not serving it now because it was stolen by thieves.
Doesn't that make sense to everyone? Just perfectly clear. Now, again, if he believes that, I believe that that is deep mental illness. And I know some of you are going to write to me and you'll say, David, that's alienating to the religious folks in your audience. It's offensive to all religious people. And I'm here to tell you the answer is no. If you are nominally Catholic, for example, and you go to church and you believe there's some greater power at play, but you're not so deluded that you think God is controlling elections or that Joe Biden has the mark of the beast or God is speaking through people like Hank Kunneman, you and I might disagree. I'd say, I don't see evidence for your understanding of the world, but I wouldn't say that you're deluded or mentally ill. Nominally Jewish beliefs about a greater force could be a God, could be something else, some kind of energy. That's not this. This is something else. Let's not conflate when I say this is deep delusion, this with the nominally religious beliefs that tens of millions of Americans hold. There is a difference here. Even if I don't subscribe to either of them, there is a difference here. Here is right-wing pastor Greg Locke declaring that Joe Biden is an imposter, a false prophet, an illegitimate president whose presidency is not only false, it's also demonic. My favorite moment is when people start to hold their hands up in the air as Greg Locke talks.
There ain't one place in the whole Bible that God ever even remotely encourages me to accept something that we know is demonic and false. Joe Biden is not the president of the United States of America as far as Greg Locke is concerned. He's a liar. He's an imposter. He's a false prophet. He's an illegitimate president that did not win, and I don't care if you send him my name, my phone number, and my mug shot that comes across his desk. I ain't scared of his executive orders. I bow before Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. I don't care what the news says. I don't care what the FBI says. I don't care what Fox and CNN or Newsmax says. I'm telling you, God is about to turn this whole thing around. If you believe that, give him a shout of praise this morning.
Give him a shout of praise and maybe drop a $20 bill in the hat, please, right? That is either a straight up grift or a mentally ill person, period. After the inauguration, religious right activist Elizabeth Enloe insists Trump will return to office and she declares that she will not recognize someone who was illegally elected as president. Notice in this, if you're watching, I guess it's her husband sitting next to her. He just smiles as she says this stuff, as if she's making a lot of sense and as if he's really proud.
I do believe that President Trump will be back in that position of authority, even though there was an inauguration yesterday. I do not and will not recognize someone who has illegally been elected as my president. I just can't do that. And, you know, I'll cut to the chase. People will ask, some have already asked us, well, at what point would you kind of transition into letting go of contending for, you know, President Trump being our next president for 4 years? Not in 2024, but like coming now. And for me, I don't know the answer to that question. I just know when I'll know it. And it's not now. I'm not even close to being ready to relinquish my faith in what God has assured my heart of and what I'm hearing reflected in the prophetic voices that I've been listening to.
It's funny. Are these people religious experts or election experts? It's hard to tell from the things that they're saying. And notice that the truth is in there. She says, I'm not ready to admit Trump lost. Everything else, couching it as faith, as prophecy, the truth about Trump's return, it's window dressing to what she actually admits, which is, I'm just not ready to accept that Donald Trump simply lost, which is what happened. Here's one last one. This is from, so before the election, a guy named Steve Schultz of ElijahList.com said, if Trump doesn't serve a second term, I will apologize. That was his promise before the election, before the inauguration. Trump is out. Biden is in, but Steve Schultz still won't apologize. He says God still has time to kick out Joe Biden and bring Donald Trump back.
As for my share, all legal remedies have come and gone. They're done. They're over. So then you say, well, then how can you possibly believe that God could do this? God never works with possibilities. He works with impossibilities. I should say he never does. When he wants to show up and show off, he makes sure every single possibility is exhausted so that man can never say, see, I knew if we held on long enough, the Supreme Court would do this or something like that. So we're giving you these prophetic proclamations and decrees and just the prophetic word of the Lord, not based on what we see could happen, but based on who we serve that tells us what he's going to do.
So there it is. Depending on who they serve, if they serve God or not, who knows, then God might somehow still be able to make his prophecy correct. I just don't understand how it's going to happen at this point, but he's refusing to apologize and definitely keep sending money. That's the one thing that binds all of these folks together is the gravy train must not stop. You've got to keep sending the money in. Incredible. And people get scammed by this. People send money to these grifters or delusional people or some combination of the two. Really horrible stuff. Twitter has permanently banned MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell's account after he continued to repeat bogus claims about Donald Trump winning the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Mike Lindell has been really a fixture of disinformation. He first appeared more prominently early in the coronavirus pandemic. He was up alongside Trump at one of the White House press briefings, talking about how Trump is a gift from God, and Trump talking about how Mike Lindell, instead of making some of his pillows, is going to make some PPE. I never heard again about whether Mike Lindell actually delivered the PPE, but that's at least what they claimed back in, what was it, maybe May or something like that. In any case, Mike Lindell became a major player in claiming that Trump was about to win, that Trump actually won, that they're going to get Biden out and Trump in for a second term. And now Twitter has decided to ban Mike Lindell over, quote, repeated violations of its civic integrity policy, according to a Twitter spokesperson. Now, because Mike Lindell has been posting so much of this stuff, it's not actually obvious right now which of his exact posts triggered this suspension. In even better news, Lindell is up against a possible lawsuit from Dominion Voting Systems. We told you yesterday, Dominion Voting Systems is suing Rudy Giuliani for $1.3 billion for his they claim defamatory claims about them. Now Mike Lindell also may be getting sued for his claims that Dominion Voting Systems were part of some big election fraud that he claims exists, but for which there is no evidence. He also urged Trump, you might remember, to declare martial law in Minnesota to obtain its ballots and somehow overturn the election. Here was Mike Lindell, quick reminder, at a pro-Trump rally. This was January 5th, not January 6th, the day of the insurrection. It was January 5th, talking about how Trump will be president.
From November 4th on, every day I have spent looking into the election fraud. I've worked with Sidney Powell, General Flynn, all the guys with these machines, these experts. And I can tell you 100% Donald Trump is going to be your president for 4 more years. I have never, ever, ever said anything less than 100%. And just today, there was so much this morning. I was on the phone with General Flynn, and just even more evidence came out. These are going to be bonus evidence just to put more people in prison.
Now, of course, no one is in prison. Joe Biden has been sworn in. And now Mike Lindell is under threat of lawsuit by Dominion Voting Systems and suspended from Twitter. So, you know, I got into a little bit of an argument with people on Twitter. I believe that the MyPillow guy is dangerous, but he's dangerous not because of who or what he is. He's made dangerous by an American society and culture in which lots of people fall for the stuff he says. So what I mean by that is this. In a more normal world, no one would pay more attention to Mike Lindell than they pay attention to the rantings of that guy on the subway platform who's screaming stuff about repenting or whatever the case may be. In a more normal world, this guy wouldn't be alongside a president on TV and having the platform that he has. Because of American society and culture and lack of education and media literacy, Mike Lindell ends up getting propped up by Trump himself, by QAnon types, and even by some of right-wing media. So the danger of Mike Lindell doesn't come just from, oh, it's someone in a country of 331 million saying crazy things. We have plenty of those people. The problem comes from the way in which our society is susceptible to falling for con men like Mike Lindell, like Trump on another level. And that's where the danger comes from. So when people say, this is just one dude, how can you say he's dangerous? Well, he's dangerous as a result of combining him. It's sort of like you can have components to a poison that by themselves aren't poisonous. When they come together, it becomes a poisonous brew. That's what we're talking about with Mike Lindell. Mike Lindell plus a susceptible population, plus those who are susceptible that have the ability to give this guy a significant platform. That's where the danger comes from. Hey, here's an interesting voicemail. You can call me at 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a guy saying, how can I be calling for unity now when I was against the things Donald Trump did when he was elected? This guy misunderstands my position, but let's take a listen.
Yeah, hi. I got a question. I'm listening to your show today. It's Monday the 25th. And you're talking something about unity. And it's like, I don't understand. We were saying unity 4 years ago when Trump was president. I mean, I don't understand that. You're saying you want unity now, but back then, everything he did, you were against.
No. I am not the one demanding unity. I'm the one saying anyone thinking there will be unity doesn't understand what's going on. And so this is a very, very important thing. I was not hypocritically demanding unity in 2016 and or ignoring it then. And then now calling for it. Back in 2016, I was clear. Listen, Trump won, and I'm going to oppose the things he does if I think they should be opposed. Joe Biden now won, and we know that we aren't going to see any unity from the right. Joe Biden is asking for unity. Some Republicans are asking for unity, even though for them, the definition of unity is Biden not doing anything different than Donald Trump. I'm not the one calling for unity. I'm the one pointing out it's not going to happen. So that's certainly a misunderstanding. We've got a great bonus show today. We will talk about control of the Senate. We will talk about Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill. That is back in the news. We will talk about Trump's second impeachment trial. Get instant access to the bonus show by becoming a member at joinpakman.com. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. SteadyMD lets you maintain a meaningful, long-lasting relationship with a primary care physician who you can meet with anytime over phone or video chat. You don't need insurance. It's only $99 a month with no other fees or copays. Visit steadymd.com/Pakman to get started.